Roxanne Derhodge. Thanks so much for joining the We Rise podcast. Really delighted to have you on today. Will you introduce yourself so folks know who I have the joy of speaking to today?
Sure. I'm Roxanne Derhodge. I'm a psychotherapist, and I've been in the field for over 25 years, where I started working with the Metro Toronto Police in Canada, where I am,
Mm,
and ended up, doing a lot of frontline work, and then eventually going on to corporate consulting, where I work individually and have been for about 12 years in my own firm at Roxanne Derhodge Consulting.
awesome. What drew you to the work initially? And you've taken some interesting twists and turns and worked with, you talked about frontline workers and individuals. Can you talk about what that work has looked like, the broader scale when you worked with groups of people versus the individual and what you've seen over time in your, you know,
Well, I think the inception of psychotherapy was a concept because back I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, where
mm-hmm.
it was back then in my time it was very traditional kind of education, along with are you going to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or a
Right.
nurse?
Mm, right.
And I thought I don't fit into any of those, but I felt a connection to speaking to others and seeing the impact that others had on me and vice versa. And I thought, well, I wonder if I could do that when I grow up. That was
Yeah.
the thought process. And
Yeah.
obviously, as I grew and looked into things, I came to Canada when I was 16 to go to university into psychology, and
Mm-hmm.
that was the foray. Was wanting to really allow others to develop the skill associated with having a voice. The
Mm-hmm.
human experience is that some people feel that they should not have a voice, and
Right.
what I realized, and in my some of my early upbringings, I saw the lack of voice, in the community or even in the family that I was born into, and recognized, that doesn't feel really good on the inside. So that was kind
Mm,
of why I decided I wanted to help people individually. And that was kind of a very, if you think of it, a very novel idea for like a 13-year-old to want to do that. And then went into the frontline works, like I said, starting with victims of crime relatively early, and then kind of spanning my career from everywhere from working with addictions, mental health,
mm-hmm.
post-traumatic stress disorder, and then going on to corporate consulting to work with companies around what would it take, what services or strategy do you need to keep employees healthy,
Mm,
happy, and at work.
mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how the kind of the transitioning of my career occurred.
And how are you spending the bulk of your time today working with people?
Bulk of my time is speaking. So I'm a keynote speaker. So I've been keynote speaking now for about 11 years. So my
Mm,
first book was written about, goodness, about 7 years ago. And
mm-hmm.
that was on relationships. So I
Mm-hmm.
started to talk about the elements of what it takes to have a healthy relationship,
Mm-hmm.
in all the areas of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's at that point I started to speak and coach and train. And coming up soon, there's a release of a new book, the ROR Return on Relationship, which will continue to work about resilience, leadership, and how leaders impact their teams and what they can do to enhance their resilience to be able to create the space for more productivity versus uh, focusing on the bottom line. Focus on relationships, and other things will take care of itself.
I love that. Absolutely. So I want to come back to that in just a moment. The topic of your new book, relationships are so key. And in a lot of the work that I do around working with communities at that broad scale to create change. So a lot of the emphasis we have is on creating a space. So I want to go back to voice, Roxanne. You mentioned earlier voice. I want to go to voice and then come back to your new book. Um, so creating a space for community members to come together, envision their future, and find tools and resources to make that vision happen. But what I found in the 25, which is so weird to say that, but it has actually been 25 years this year that I've been in the field. People often don't, in the collective space, feel like they have a voice or that their voice has value or meaning. And sometimes that's from an internal place, and sometimes that's from an external place. Sometimes it's because they don't feel like there's a space, a physical space or collective space that feels safe to them, where they can share their ideas, where they can envision their future, or even if they have a vision for the future, if people are struggling to put food on the table, or take care of their basic needs, even the thought about envisioning a community's future feels very far afield for them. So can you talk what that process has looked like, either into the family you were born into, in your community of upbringing, or in university and your professional work? You know, how have you found that people can find their voice, use their voice, and to learn to trust it too? Because that's the other element, you know, is finding our voice and then trusting that, and in community, staying with it to create change. Can you talk more about that?
Well, I think we can look at it from the, like to your point, the macro level or the micro level. So let's start at the micro level. So I think ideally, most of us did not come from an environment where we know, if according to attachment theory, where I'm just okay the way I am, right? I'm all good, right? Ideally, all of us have loved to have come from a space where I learned to or I was born into a space where I learned to listen to my voice, get validated by my voice, have to create the safety if I were to make a mistake, to have the right guidance. I think ideally that's the space that most of us I think eventually can get to, but may not have been born into it. So that's the space that I always say to my son or other kids, I'm all good. I'm I'm a human being in my imperfection. I'm all good because I
Right.
have kind of the bumpers to kind of
Right.
to go back to listen to who I truly need to be. And that's the evolution of self-worth, self-esteem, that my voice is valuable. I'm just good in the world. I'm not going to be like everybody else, but I'm glad I'm different.
Mm-hmm.
On that end, I think if we think about people within families,
Mm-hmm.
our first culture is our family.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to look within that to say, what are the lessons, or what are the things that I learned about connection, safety, security, and what we call psychological safety today.
Mm-hmm.
And when I go out in the world, how do I show my space? To your
Mm-hmm.
point, I may have something valuable, but if I feel I didn't get the validation from the first culture being my family and my life, I'm going to second guess myself and not show the space. And then we grow up, and I say we carry that little part of ourselves with us, but we're big people now.
Right.
Then we get into, say, communities or whatever. And if we don't have a space where we can feel safe, we're less likely to use our voice in a way that would be additive to the collective. So I
Mm.
think we do the
Mm. Love
power of the
that.
system of what exists. So if we think of systems theory,
Mm-hmm.
is the collective is, who's at the top. And I know we don't like to think like this, but that's the reality of any system that we're in. And how is that leader or leadership, consortium at the top in whatever realm, creating that space so that each and every person finds their uniqueness within themselves and feels empowered to share their voice.
Mm-hmm.
That being said,
That's interesting.
big,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
big subset.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think achievable, because that's where the reflection and the awareness within the individuals, if it's a corporation, if it's a community that's trying to, get youth off the street, whatever it is, you have to have a common vision.
Mm-hmm.
You may have a strategic plan. That's good. We all
Mm-hmm.
need that. But how is that? How do you have buy-in? Is it coming from the top down, or is it coming from, or is there intersectionality between
Mm-hmm.
top and bottom? Because what I always say is, if you don't have a shared vision within the context of safety, we
Mm-hmm.
can have the most, fantastic strategic vision and mission and all those tactical skills and all that stuff. But at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, if we don't have trust, you're not going to have that joining, which allows real change. Short term, you could probably create some change, but I think long term, with shared vision, you need buy-in from each and every person. So whether it's the doorman, to the building, all the way up to the CEO, voice is valuable. We're all one, and you never know collectively where you're going to get what that glue is that creates that shared vision. So I always say, look at your collective. Where are you? What is your history? What is your story? Why are you doing what you're doing?
Mm-hmm.
And who are your people, right? Who are the people, and what is the outcome that everyone has in mind? Not just the
Mm-hmm.
senior leadership team or the CEO or the board or whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
the person that's coming and spending their time maybe with a grassroots organization. why are they helping? And why
Yeah.
is this significant for them? And I think as you start to look at all those pieces, that's where I think you can start to understand the collective and in turn how you could create change.
I love that. So, can you talk a little bit more, Roxanne, about the difference in, this leadership, maybe top-down approach, maybe not, holding space. Maybe this is getting into the topic of your book a little bit, new book. Holding space, creating space, but really making sure that all the folks that are involved have a chance to have a say in what that looks like versus that bottom up leadership. In communities that I've worked with, what I've found in terms of creating change over time, whether that's working towards a regional vision or a community vision or economic development or sustainability, environmental regeneration, it's the bottom up ideas that really create the most change over time. It's really the local ideas and local leaders when they have space to come together. And absolutely so key what you've said. I've seen time and time again where it's the relationships and the trust, those two things are the glue. That's, without relationships and trust, really not, I would say, change can certainly happen, but it's not going to have meaning over the long haul, in my experience. For example, in my field, in planning and in other fields, short-term technical assistance has value, but it doesn't create that lasting change that's really needed where people know each other and they ask about their grandkids or their grandparents and what's happening and how are you doing. And often it is that bottom up ideas and leadership, but there's also a need for that top down partnership. But it's different in corporate culture to some degree versus
Mhm.
community work. So can you talk a little bit about that intersection of the top down approach, the bottom up approach, where that comes together, and how leadership can create authentic spaces for real voice to have meaning in different cultures you work with, corporate
Well,
and
let's
community?
start at the community end, which you're talking about. I would say if it's a grassroots organization, there's something that there's something that needs to be achieved, something that's budgeting, and there's need to make change. And from the grassroots end, you generally may have some advocates that are pretty, they're strong, they're passionate, and they're going to make change.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the leadership coming in. I think in those spaces a lot of passion and energy is necessary to gain the momentum, but leadership has to also say, what is our role? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how is it strategically that we can work with you,
Mm-hmm.
um, not to temper the passion, but to also be realistic about what's trying to be achieved. And I think if you look at it as a blueprint to say,
Mm-hmm.
how is it that we're going to, in 3 or 5 or 10 years from now, what will this, once we've achieved this goal, what will it look like?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think if you understand it from the management level and also from the people at the bottom or even the middle,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's an opportunity to talk about what can go wrong, what can go really well, what are, what they talk about, those big, hairy, audacious goals.
Right.
Put it out there, right? Because I think unless you can really have that primary level conversation and everybody's opinion is valued, and I think that's the big thing. And you might think,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, that's a over the top, not doable. But
Right.
that's where the power of creativity and innovation comes, right? With diversity and perspective and age and stage, and if it's a customer base or a social welfare problem, the end user and the practitioners, all those things, you get the perfect combination of all the things that are possible, and then you parse
Mm-hmm.
it out a bit at a time based
Mm-hmm.
on what strategically things should look like. And I think
Yeah.
that's the main thing that I see, is that sometimes in corporate,
Mm-hmm.
right, there's a
Mm-hmm.
business, and,
Mm-hmm.
and the business maybe gets started by a leader who eventually, through a VC or whatever, grows the business, and it's coming from a different lens. But
Mm-hmm.
that leader also has a passion for why they started what they did.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really tapping into that.
Yeah.
So the leader that maybe started the inception of the idea has to really think, okay, I have to ensure that people understand me, They
Mm.
understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. Yes, I'm for profit.
Mm-hmm.
We all have to, make money at some point,
Mm-hmm.
but don't get lost with that vision, because I think what happens with a lot of startups, or if they get too big and they lose kind of control over kind of the developmental process of their company, sometimes, the CEO gets removed or is at arm's length, and that
Mm-hmm.
passion potentially does not translate down. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it really, I talk about 5 levels for leadership, is that leaders need to be self-aware.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are they doing what they're doing? Who are you? How do you come in contact with your values? And why did you start this? And
Mm-hmm.
how are you tapping into that often? Then self-awareness allows relationship to others, and then basically a relationship to the overall community, whatever that is, whether it's a company or a collective or a community.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do I relate?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm connected to me, I'm going to be keep myself accountable and look at how transparent am I being. And that's oftentimes when you hear a lot of senior leaders say, well, um, I might lose control if people get to know me too well. But it's a
Mm-hmm.
balance where
Mm-hmm.
if you get to know someone, and Christine, if I get to know you and I understand what you're passionate in and what you're trying to achieve, I'm going to work harder,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm your team, or if I report to you, or if I report up to you. So there's that element. How is it that you're recognized? As a leader, how do you like to be recognized? And
Mm-hmm.
leaders often go, what do you mean? What about me? I go, no, no, no. Come in contact with your leadership story,
Mm-hmm. That's
right?
interesting.
Like,
Yeah.
so that you look at the elements of why you started to lead. Like, I think of
Mm-hmm.
myself, mine was voice. I grew up in a
Mm-hmm.
little community in Trinidad and Tobago. There was a village connection. I saw, like I said, disconnection. So the nemesis of, or the whole inception of what I wanted to do was to always, regardless of where I go in the world, is to allow others to have voice. So
Mm.
how are you looking into yourself? How are you making decision making or balance processing where you are keeping your biases at the forefront,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
what are my blind spots, and am I aware of how I'm stepping into it, and then how am I connecting? So I talk about
Yeah.
those 5 areas, and then if leadership or community or boards in whatever realm are able to go through these processes, they're going to vet through all those things I'm talking about,
Yeah.
right? And then we're looking at 3, 5, 10 legacy. When you're no longer here and you leave this imprint behind, what is
Mm-hmm.
the imprint that you'll be leaving?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that sounds like a lot, but I think it's, with the leaders that I have interviewed for my book, the ones that do it well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of, leaders are kind of looking, especially with what we've been through in the last 2 years, and saying, wow, I think there's something to be said about, trust and, people using their feet when they're not valued, and
Mm-hmm.
taking less, to not commute for 3 hours because they want to be home with their children to
Mm-hmm.
watch, hockey or t-ball or whatever. So I
Mm-hmm.
think we're finding the where we are in the world right now is finally in alignment with what I call authentic leadership and connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and people are learning it the hard way right now in
Unfortunately,
the last 2 years. Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
and losing your talents and all those things. But
Yeah.
I've often had they call it the new resignation, but I've always also heard it being called the new calibration,
Mm-hmm.
where people are
Yeah,
actually calibrating to what they value.
absolutely. Such a great way to say that. So when you think so these 5 elements are key, and I guess if you could bring it just even one higher level around the leaders that you've worked with, interpersonally or in groups of leaders, what changes have leaders need to make to be more effective at that authentic leadership, at really creating culture where people feel valued and that their voice matters, and what's really held people back from leaders back from being able to do that?
Well, I think it's based on, sometimes it's on industry, sometimes,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? You think of automotive versus banking, versus IT.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's sector and historical context.
Mm.
Of
Mm-hmm.
the legal profession is kind of like, are we really thinking about what people need to connect, right? Because they're not very, tactical driven, outcome based problem solving, right? So I think first of all, you have to look at sector, then you have to look at, what is the history of this company or the environment? And how are they doing? What's the litmus test say? If I were to use a litmus test like we used to do in
Right.
science, how are you doing? Are you doing well, really well? You may be getting profitability without a doubt, because I will hear people say, here, Roxanne, there's a lot of really profitable people that aren't really authentic. And they're right. So, people like Walt Disney and Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, they're not known for this kind of sense. They're very innovative and stuff like that. But I think what we need to look at is the sustainability through COVID. What happened to companies that were not showing people that they were valued?
Right.
Yeah. Right. And we are seeing a shift now that a lot more people, I know even with me, I live in a little town in Niagara Falls, Ontario. I was buying everything local, right? Because I wanted to support my community. Before I did, but I didn't really think it through. So if everybody's making those changes, right? What's going to happen to companies that maybe are profitable now, but let's say they're kind of doing it, but they're not really thinking about what it is to retain their top talent? What's going to happen 5, 10, 15 years down the road? So I think you have to look. I think what happens with companies and CEOs that I work with or leadership teams, it's the ones that recognize, wow, we're pretty successful, but there's people still disgruntled. There's still people, our mental health maybe is kind of through the roof, or deliverables, sometimes we're still missing the mark, but we're still making money. However, what's the environment tell me by the metrics I'm getting?
Right, the whole picture.
The whole picture. So what's your short term? What's your long term? How are your conflict in the workplace? How's your incidental absences? All those things. How, if you have a union in the environment, what kind of arbitrations are you looking at? And really being, you could just look at it on a flat kind of a P&L and say, oh, we're doing good. Or you can say, these other variables, if they were to maintain, how will they look 5 years from now? Right? Yeah. And I think that's what I often say when we do an organizational assessment, when we go in to work with companies, we're looking at really what's happening with their people, with their emotional intelligence at all these different levels. And then we're also looking at the leader's capacity in all those areas. And then we're saying, if there's a divide, you're still profitable, right? That's good. But, how is it that you're going to close the gap on these areas so that you iterate or you shift so that people feel validated, they feel valued, they could be innovative. When people are psychologically safe and secure, they pull out all the stops. Yeah. And innovation and creativity comes, and they want to do well. We all want to do well, Christine. With whatever we do, we want to think, wow, I was part of that company. We built that skyscraper. I was the one that did the glass. And you hear that when you go into companies. So I think that's what companies need to look at. That being said, some other companies would listen to me saying and go, well, we're profitable, we're all good. That's probably not a company for the leaders that I'm going to be working with. I'm going to be working, or unfortunately, sometimes if there's a crisis, and then they go, we need help.
Right, because we're in react mode, right?
Either reactivity or people that are recognizing and looking at the reality of what they want for their company, and creating that space, to say, okay, let's look at it. We're doing well. How do we give back? And it's oftentimes it's based on the transformation or the transformative space of the leader and the leadership team.
Can you say more about that? That transformative space. What is that, and what does that create?
Well, from the leaders that I interviewed, I'll tell you about one leader. It was a startup, and they'd done very well, but he even said, I was arrogant. I just young and wealthy, and I had, the jets and whatever, all the things associated with success. Um, but people didn't really kind of like me.
Mm. Right.
Right.
That
And
reality.
yeah, and I think it took, in this case, a personal issue at home, where this person kind of, they say through adversity comes the best teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at that point he started to look at, okay, I've have all this stuff, but people around me are not happy. Um, how could I shift that? And what he started to do is he started to go into service, meaning he started to go on to local boards. He started to get really involved in this community of where his company was. So some of it was adversity made him stop, but then he really made the shift
Mm-hmm.
to create changes and to really, get who is Christine? If she's on my plant floor,
Mm-hmm.
who is she really? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Or,
Mm-hmm.
what do I know about some of the people that I'm around all the time? If
Right.
I'm so elevated and disconnected, do I know the pulse? And I'm not suggesting the CEO has the time to get to know everybody, but you should kind of know the elements of what's happening in your business units or at your call center or at customer pickup or
Mm-hmm.
at research and development. What is being said? So, how are you collating that information accordingly? And what are you doing to listen to what people are saying in your town halls, in your anonymous feedback, in your kind of get-togethers? Are you the type when you walk into the room when we used to have cooler talks?
Right.
Did everybody get really, really quiet?
Mm-hmm.
And did the conversation shift? And how are you doing it now virtually? How are you
Mm-hmm.
finding out, right? Considering that we have, some people are fully back in person, but I know a lot of companies have gone with the hybrid models now.
Mm-hmm.
How are you creating that element and space of connection and understanding the pulse of what's really happening? And if you don't know, you need to find out.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to start by being transparent about if you haven't been a good leader, like this leader did.
Mm-hmm.
When COVID hit, he picked up the phone. He had 200 conversations with 200 of his employees.
Oh,
And
interesting.
often would be raised with, oh God, the CEO is calling me. So like, why is it? To, hey, I'm just calling to say this is a tough time. I just want to let you know we'll do whatever we need to. We'll recalibrate accordingly, but nobody's going to lose their job,
Mm-hmm. Oh,
which took
fascinating.
a lot of work, right?
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
again, he showed his
Mm-hmm.
words and actions matched,
Mm-hmm.
which created transparency, which created trust,
Mm-hmm.
which allowed them to get through, a lot of tough times. And a lot of companies that hadn't had that were scrambling, which we
Mm-hmm.
know that there's a lot of examples of companies like that out there.
Yeah, great. What a great example, Roxanne. So it sounds like not only for this leader, learning through adversity, leaning into that adversity, seeing where change needed to be happen, but the follow through was also essential in this case, and communicating that, getting to know the employees within the company, and then listening and following through. What else anything else you want to distill from the book in terms of, those gut level thoughts that you have for leaders about what they really need to cultivate to be authentic leaders?
But they're people too. And I
Sure.
know they're level of tactical outcome, right? They are high level, sometimes A or triple A people.
Right, right.
They need to keep themselves healthy, right? They
Mm-hmm.
need to take the time. They need to slow. They need to show others that they're also being impacted. Don't look like you are unscathed when
Mm-hmm.
there's limbs falling off all around you.
Mm-hmm.
Be transparent enough to say, wow, that's a tough time.
Mm-hmm.
When our doors got closed and our revenue was down by this much, you must be scared. But the leader,
Mm-hmm.
and I think one skill that leaders can learn is to tell stories
Mm-hmm.
and use examples
Mm-hmm.
and let people know how it's affected you. Or maybe you had a story in your life that you can bring in so they can get that relatability. And then they go, wow,
Right.
he or she's a person too.
Yeah.
And then I think with that in mind, and for leaders listening that haven't done it well,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to create change tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
but there's always a beginning point.
Yeah.
And when you get to the point where you can say, I haven't done it so well, and I'm going to tell you, I'm putting myself out there because I'm going to try to kind of make things right.
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to develop a plan, or I'm working through something and I need your help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Right? Which
absolutely.
is hard, right? Because that means vulnerability. That means, with the autocratic kind of leadership style, we're suggesting transformational style. And if you've not been there, you can't swing from the left to the right or vice
Mm-hmm.
versa.
Mm-hmm.
Just small incremental steps. And people with that follow through, with the transparency, communicate as much as you can, even if it's bad news. Because after a while, people respect that, because not all news is good news,
Yeah.
but at least they know that you're respecting their space enough, because they have the same worries about their families, about how they're going to pay their bills, where the company is going, just like you do. And if you kind of share it, are able to get guidance on how to share it in a way, um, it comes along with time, consistency, bits, ongoing overall, and then just asking for feedback, which can be hard to hear at first,
Yeah.
and making sure that you follow up with, like you said, that closing the loop at the end to let
Mm-hmm.
people know, that you hear their concerns and what your plans are to do about it.
Yeah, great. I love that. So, listening, leaning in, telling stories, leaning into that vulnerable space to some degree, and hearing feedback and following through, it sounds like are all essential. So, I want to bring it back to your story a little bit more, Roxanne, and feel free to bring in which part of your life you'd like to, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about what brings you joy in your life.
My joy is, I love it when I make other people happy,
Mm.
when I can give. And I'm the type, and I've always been a bit like this. I think about, if I learn something about someone, that might be maybe inconsequential or something minute. I try to remember little things. So when I meet that person again, um, but that means you're actively listening. So it's something that I think I really, really developed. I try to remember. And I remember my dad, I actually wrote a poem in the front of my book that I dedicated. My
Mm.
dad was a leader, and I was exposed to him, and his leadership, and was, I would say, one of the best leaders that I know.
Mm.
When you have a conversation, always make the person that you're speaking to feel like they're the only person in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I, have worked at, but
Mm-hmm.
it's something that I always strive to. So, when you go to these, events and all of that, and, you're being pulled in them, just stop and get to know whoever is in front of you. Christine, if I don't know you and I'm spending time with you, you're not going to hit everybody in the room, but you're going to remember some valuable things about people. And that the level of connection, what happens is, it's pretty amazing. And you'll meet someone years later and they'll say, wow, you remembered that? I'll
Mm-hmm.
go, well, yeah, because I remember you were talking about this, or this, or, a pet that you had, or a place that you went, or something like that. So I think that's one thing that I would say is my superpower that I try to continually enhance. So, connection with people that are important to me, and even more so through COVID, it showed the value of, it's not about things, it's about, experiences with people, right? Like, I mean, I have a 20-year-old son. It's about those experiences and, spaces, or a good meal that you prepare for people that you love, and that you sit there and you enjoy it, and you laugh and you joke. Those are the things that, make me, feel so grateful.
I love that. So your presence, and I love that
Mm-hmm.
you've brought in gratitude as well, and things that bring you joy. How about those days which we all have? I love that you're just so honest about leaders being humans too. The days that you struggle, what keeps you moving forward on the days you
Well,
struggle?
I'll tell you something that just happened yesterday. We had to put down our cat from 13 years,
Mm, mm,
right? So,
so
um,
hard.
what did I do? I was quiet. I, really reflected on, and his name was Tig, what he brought to our lives.
Mm-hmm.
My son and I spent time with him, just, kind of being with him, because he was euthanized yesterday.
Mm,
Um, it just about, of course, there was lots of tears, but really, what did he bring to us? And,
mm,
I was saying goodnight to my son last night, and he sent me a message, and he said, it was the most beautiful message. And he said, Mom, we were so lucky. We had 13 years. How many people
mm,
have 13 years with someone or a pet that they love. And he started
Mm-hmm.
to kind of litanize what he enjoyed about him and the experiences we had. We had a time when he was stuck in a tree back here for 7 days and he would not come down,
That's a really
right?
long time.
The firefighter said, guess what? He got up, he's gonna come back down. But we had to keep the door cracked so we could hear him and all
Right.
that
Yeah.
because my young. But so I think it's
Wow.
of those things that are, when I'm having a tough time, I get quiet. I meditate or I pray more.
Mm-hmm.
I write in my gratitude journal. I'm so lucky to have the things that I have in my life. And I just slow because
Mm.
then I realize I have to honor what I feel, which I'm sad, but I'm in joy because I had that experience. So those are the things that I do. I move. I
Mm-hmm.
try to get more sleep when I'm having a tough time. I try to go in an awareness space about whatever that is for me, and it could be, instrumental. I love the harp. I'll listen
Mm.
to instrumental harp music,
Yeah.
and I'll do that more because I thought today you're my first meeting today. I wanted to get ready
Yeah.
to be able to be in the right space to be able to give as much as I could, even though I'm grieving.
Mm. That awareness that you held, and you still held the space for the grief that you have, but then you also have the awareness to know what energy you want to bring. So how do you cultivate that, but still letting the grief be present because you're a human being too? Yeah, so beautifully said. Love that. So when you think about, the book that you have getting ready to come out and your work and your speaking career, what makes you excited, Roxanne, about what's happening in your community and your professional work? Tell us
Well,
a
I
little
think
more.
my ultimate goal is to be able to have people, whether it's leaders, moms, dads, coaches,
Mm-hmm.
people in community, to recognize that we all have value. There's a reason each one of us is here,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if I could impact people to listen, to slow enough, and I often say I view my role as being a vein
Mm-hmm.
of allowing others to get so deep that they can listen to truly what their value is and
Mm-hmm.
to impart that in whatever role they are having in, so whether it's in their community or in their family or with that team, or in the corporation, to be able to really continue to build that space out. When I speak on stage, it's about capturing that and bringing my essence to deliver that message. When I'm training leaders in their teams, it's about really, sharing and helping people understand each other and not look at differences as a divide, but as more information of what it takes to get closer. So
Mm-hmm.
my hopes is just to be able to do more of this work, and so then my legacy story is that whoever I've touched, in my career from beginning to end, that minimally they would have said that they learned to listen to that deep space within themselves and to use their voice for highest and best good.
Beautiful. Love that. So you've already shared so many key pieces of wisdom with others. Two questions I want to bring in. What key lessons learned would you share with others who are working to create change? And conversely, what do you wish someone told you 5 or 10 years ago about this work? So key lessons, and what do you
Yeah,
wish someone told you?
I think key lessons for change is think about, what are you most proud about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you've made mistakes, which we've all made mistakes as when we lead in whatever capacity, don't beat yourself up out about it. Get quiet and curious
Mm-hmm.
and think, what is it that I need to learn? Because we're a collective whole,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you think, well, I didn't do so well in this particular area with this decision, really reflect on it and think, what is it? What is the wisdom that I need to grow? What is the teacher in this moment?
Mm-hmm.
And try not to repeat it as
Mm-hmm.
much as possible. And if you do screw up, which we often do, be
Mm-hmm.
transparent about it and
Mm-hmm.
ask forgiveness
Mm-hmm.
and move on from that space. So I think to create real sustainable change, think about, what skills do I have? What blind spots do I have? And how is it that I can continue to stay connected to myself so I can minimize those blind spots to get me along the continuum of change, to be, again, the person, the role, part of a team to create that long-term sustainable change.
Mm-hmm. The individual and the collective, the both and. Yeah, beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So many pieces of wisdom, but also you've shared a lot of tactical things that folks can do within their work and their homes. What other thoughts or reflections would you like to share, Roxanne? And how can people learn more about your work?
Well, I think, for the average person listening there, I'm a therapist, and people would say, oh, you're a therapist. Guess what? We are human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And I truly believe that we come into this world like a tabula rasa, and
Mm-hmm.
we have the capacity in us to be able to get back to that original space. So to recognize you don't have to be the Dalai Lama or Desmond Tutu or a psychotherapist or a psychologist,
Mm-hmm.
that we are human beings that have the capacity to create that space within ourselves to connect with others. And, start where you are,
Mm-hmm.
gauge where you are and say, oh, I'm not so good in this situation, but I'm awfully good in this situation. I'm good with this personality, but I'm not so good with this. And ask the people closest to you and say, tell me what I'm good at,
Mm-hmm.
reference to connection. And when is it that I don't come up? When is it that I don't deliver?
Mm-hmm.
And you note that down as a beginning point, because that will give you a lot of information about how you can create ongoing learnings for yourself, and always keep people close to you that are willing to be completely honest with you,
Mm-hmm. I love
versus
that.
people around you that kind of hold you up and buffer you up. Because
Mm-hmm.
try
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that the people that you have in your life um, are real and trustworthy, and that they're kind of give you the goods as they see it, because
Right. I love that. I
those
love
are the
that.
people that allow you to see yourself for what how you are viewed in the world. So
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that. So tell us how we can find your new book that's going to come out, your existing work, and more about you.
well, you can to go to roxannederhodge.com /quiz. You'll be able to take a quiz about authenticity, either at home or at work. And it'll kind of give you a sense. You kind of benchmark where you are. It'll send you a little bit of a report, and there's a little bit of a gift after you fill out the report. For the book, it will be released on May 12th.
Okay.
On Amazon, so there'll be digital and obviously hard copies, or you could always reach out to my team. So you could go to chatwithroxanne.com. You could jump on a call with me, and we'll kind of give you a bit of support and direct you, in whatever way that we think we can help you.
Great. What a great offering there, and ways to connect with you. So we'll look forward to including all those notes on the webpage and the show notes. So Roxanne, thanks so much for joining today. What a wonderful conversation, and it's been great speaking with you. So thanks for joining.
Thank you so much. What a lovely space you created, Christine,
Yeah.
when you're into. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.